Here's a question from Daniel Felser. He asks, "It seems the U.S. government has power and control in most Latin South American countries. In which Latin American country or countries does the U.S. have the least amount of influence?" And then he asks, "Which is the freest country in Latin or South America?" Just for those of you who might not know the difference between Latin America and South America, South America is a continent that refers to the area going as far south as Argentina and Chile, and then up in the northern countries, Venezuela and Colombia, it ends. Panama is not considered part of South America, but Central America and Mexico and Spanish-speaking countries in the Caribbean are considered part of Latin America. So, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Latin America refers to pretty much any Spanish-speaking country in the Western Hemisphere. Um, so, anyways, getting back to Daniel's question, um, U.S. power and control. Well, certainly, Venezuela and Cuba stand out as two countries where the U.S. government has the least power and control at the moment. And then related to that, right now anyway, you've got Bolivia and Nicaragua stand out as governments who have are somewhat pro Chavez, pro Venezuela, and anti-American, I suppose you could say. Although what the government posture is, and then what the people's posture is within those countries is not necessarily the same. So you can go to Venezuela, and people aren't necessarily anti-American. Although if the government tries hard enough, they can convince people to be anti anything. So, but then your question, which is the freest country? This is a trick question, I guess, depending on your definition of free. Um, if it's freedom in terms of the populace and their ability to be free, in terms of freedom of the press and freedom to start a business and freedom of religion, and I think most of Latin America is relatively free, excluding Venezuela or Cuba or maybe Bolivia and perhaps Nicaragua, but certainly in countries like Panama or Mexico or even Ecuador, for the most part you can do as you may. I've heard of media restrictions even in Ecuador, where they prevent certain media publications from publishing certain articles or news items that they don't want published, and that can happen anywhere in Latin America. I think Chile stands out as a country that, in terms of their justice system, in terms of their sound economics, and in terms of their, overall acceptance of modernity. They would stand. They're supposedly they have one of the more transparent economies. I think justice and the justice system is something that is typically not very good, doesn't work, and represents a threat to freedom, and that goes for Panama, that goes for Mexico, that goes for almost all of Latin America. They just do not have a very good judicial system. It's largely corrupt, and whoever has the right contacts and the right um, enough money can essentially influence the justice system, and that's going that way, has gone that way, you could argue, in the U.S. So no real surprises there. Um, And in terms of freedom, again, you can look at it from a social perspective. I find the Brazilians and northern, tropical countries, people people seem to be more free in terms of enjoying their lives, whereas they're all about the party and the celebration, and work comes second, type of a society. When you get further down into places like Chile, where work is more important, and you know maybe it doesn't feel as free just because of the way that society functions. So and then looking at in terms of U.S. influence, certainly the U.S. has a strong influence over Colombia right now. That's something that has changed over the years. Um, the U.S. has helped to reduce, I guess you could say, move the drug problem to Mexico. Um, but the result is that Colombia is a lot safer than it used to be, and how or what role the U.S. played in that, and how the problems got moved to Mexico, I don't know. But really, in day-to-day life, in most of these countries, you're not going to notice the hand of Uncle Sam in everyday life. Um, and if you really want to go to a country that is anti-U.S. government, then you're in Venezuela, you're in Cuba, you're in Bolivia, and there may be sacrifices in terms of your lifestyle in order for you to live in one of those places. So I hope this answers your question.